one of the things I was going to say is like Darren Brown. He's a magician, a mentalist. He has like a TV show. He's an Englishman. He had this radical, I guess you'd say like a good old boy from the South in Florida who was like, they had interviews with him before the show. He's doing all this to like really teach us viewers something about humans. And he's like, man, those Mexicans coming across that border, they need to stay away, yada, yada, yada. And like, it's this really hardcore ideology, political ideology that's been spreading. And finally, during the show, I'm skipping a lot. I'll link it in the description for anybody who wants to watch it. He finally gets to sit in front and he's told to stare eye to eye. Don't take your eyes off. Look at him in the eyes and stare at this other human being who's sitting right across from you. And it is so, I got goosebumps and actually started tearing up when I saw it because the man started to cry. A couple minutes in, and he started to cry and he goes, can I hug you? And he went over and he hugged him. And he's like, it's okay. I love you. Like, and it was the most, you want to talk about spiritual? I mean, I almost want to call it that. It's like, it was so groundbreaking. And this man was willing to sacrifice himself, even though it was all a plot. He thought he got shot. It was all planned. He had no clue, but he defended these Mexicans who were being chased by like what looked like a white supremacist biker gang. And he got shot for them. And it was like teaching us a huge lesson about humanity. So I love what you've said today. I hope it betters what we learn and take away and how we can try to reach across those traditions and boundaries and try to understand each other better and not hate as much.
Yeah.
This show literally took its own ride. We literally went, I told you, wherever we're going to go, we can go.
Well, you're interviewing some very interesting people I've seen in your prior interviews, and you refer to their books and all. And I hope you're writing a book about your experience. I think this is would be a bestseller.
I would like to. I will plan on it. It's not only that. I think it'd also be my life, because my life plays a role into this. And I think the education I've gotten and the learning, I've been tugged back and forth, but I have to also realize, look, if I was born in a Muslim country, I would be a Muslim. I would be adamant that Prophet Muhammad is the one, or, somewhere else. I'd be born, I'd probably be a Buddhist in Indonesia or wherever. And I think that understanding each other will help us. So yeah, I would love to write a book. But speaking of you, since you're the special guest, I want to talk about your books just for a second as we're coming out of here, because you have blown my mind. I legit want to educate more in your books here. So Jihad, the origin of holy war in Islam. This is a hot button issue. Very hot. I've heard that jihad can mean multiple things, as we talked about interpretation. But what is this book about? Is it going to tell us what jihad was understood by Muslims to mean? And do you think that, this is getting to a point, do you think jihad took on a new interpretation over time when they were in peaceful moments? What are your thoughts of jihad?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. Jihad, of course, doesn't mean war at all. It means striving. It means struggling very hard to do something. And the idiom in the Quran, the kind of phrase in the Quran is jihad fi sabilillah, is struggling in the path of God, doing that struggle in the path of God. So there are other words in the Quran that refer to fighting. Qital is one, so the jihad doesn't really mean fighting. It doesn't really mean war, but it means striving in the path of God can be to support the community. And if the community is under threat, it can mean fighting. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the purpose in the Quran, not the only purpose, but one meaning of the sense of jihad. So that includes fighting for the community under pressure. That because jihad has a kind of spiritual, religious tone to it of struggle in the path of God, that is for God's good. That's the term that became applied to fighting for Islam. And later, Islam did not start out as I guess you could call it what do you call it? The word is slipping my mind.
It's okay. I do it all the time.
When you have an imperial tradition, right? It didn't start out with the sense of it becoming a religion of an empire or a conquest. Conquest is not in the Quran. Doesn't exist. It's not really there. But when Islam became extremely successful demographically and also militarily, then Muslim leaders used that notion of jihad from the Quran in order to justify conquest and controlling other peoples and other communities of people. So it's a kind of imperialist interpretation that was imposed on the Quran to justify the imperialism of the Muslim conquests and control of other communities of people. So yeah, there is justification for jihad, meaning war and fighting. And if it's fighting on behalf of the community, it's holy, it's sacred. So you could call it holy war. But it was also engaging in all kinds of other things on behalf of the community, caring for the poor, taking care of orphans and widows who don't have people to take care of them, to support them economically, and all kinds of other activities as well. That's also jihad in Islam. So there are Muslims who want to define jihad as holy war on behalf of the Muslim community to expand and conquer the world. But that's not the normative position.
Okay.
But there are people in the West who then pick up on that and they say, yeah, that's the normative position. That's what all Muslims want. And that's not true. The jihadi Muslims, by definition, and they call themselves jihadis, take that position that I just said, that jihad is a desideratum. It's a requirement, God's requirement to conquer the world and reestablish the caliphate until the entire world will either accept Islam or will accept living under the hegemony and the rule of Islam. Right? That's a position. But that's not the normative majoritarian position in the Muslim world.
I think we should also take this back to Judaism, for example, for people, because that's the way I take things away from hotspots sometimes to give you an analogy, and then they can learn and go, oh, because, well, they want Islam to be bad in every single respect, and it has ill intent. But when we look at Judaism, look at what happened in the war in 70, right? Before the war in 70, you had certain Jews who were willing to fight. I mean, they literally believed in God's kingdom coming and were hoping that the angels of God would come out of heaven and help them defeat the Romans, or God was going to finally set up the Jewish state to rule the world. Why? Because there are prophecies that say one day, the mountaintop of Zion will be, above all the nations' mountains, and there'll be the nations coming and grabbing the coattail of 10 Jews and say, teach us your ways, So they're coming from, if I was them born in their household, I would probably think this is justified and this is good and this is holy war. But most Jews were totally content living in the empire. We're totally happy in the diaspora, out here enjoying life and saying, chill out, guys, stop. Now, if we wanted to be disrespectful to Judaism, we would then say, and there are people who do this, Judaism is at its core wants to rule the world, which we have these weird conspiracies out there that Jews somehow rule the world right now, even though they make up less than 1% of the world's population. It's like they rule the world. There's a conspiracy here, and they really want to destroy us all. So at the end, you're either going to become a Noahide, become a Jew, or get your head cut off or die. It's always some conspiracy. So we shouldn't paint because certain minority groups that are radicals do certain things, and then we want to paint everybody else like they're all like that. It's an analogy I figure I'd paint. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'd like to speak to that a little bit.
Please.
That view is a bit of a Christian projection on Judaism, because actually I wrote a book about this as well. It's called Holy War. It's called Holy War in Judaism. It's maybe I didn't see it. You might not have it there.
Holy War. Yep, here it is.
Holy War in Judaism: The Fall and Rise of a Controversial Idea. That's right. So the Jews were Judaism, or a Jewish practice among Jews in the biblical period, was pretty militant.
Okay.
But the militancy was really to establish a safe haven for monotheism. It was the only monotheist gig in town. That's it. There wasn't anything else. And it wasn't all that much fun. God was a spiritual notion. There were no idols. There was no worship. There weren't supposed of idols. There wasn't anything concrete to hold on to. There were no kind of fertility rites that were connected with the fertility goddess that would inseminate the flocks and the crops. So they would engage. We know about this in the biblical and extra biblical literature. Engage in kind of fertility rites of like public displays of sex to kind of get the gods or goddesses turned on, so that their sperm and eggs would come down and fertilize the world. That's exciting. That's fun. That didn't happen in biblical monotheism, right? In pre-Jewish Israelite monotheism. And they were a very small community, and it was easy to become influenced by the communities that lived around it. So the militancy in the Hebrew Bible, if you look at it carefully, militancy in the Hebrew Bible, you don't even have to look at it that carefully. You don't have to like cherry pick for this. It's overwhelming.
Oh yeah.
The militancy in the Hebrew Bible, and it was quite militant and quite violent, was to establish a safe haven in one place, the Holy Land, the land of Israel, the place in that area where they could worship undisturbed. It was not to conquer other countries. In fact, there are verses in the Torah itself that say, God's saying, I didn't tell you to go conquer these people. This is their land. This is not your land. You conquer this land. Mm-hmm. And this land needs to be free of idolatry. And the references in the prophetic works that you were citing for the whole world kind of coming to know God, is not really not a militant or a conquest or an imperialist reference at all. It's a kind of an aspiration that maybe someday let's say with confidence, someday everyone will come to realize there's one God. Right. So it really is not it never was a missionizing religion, and partly because there was no notion in the ancient Jewish perspective that non-Jews would burn in hell. That didn't exist.
I like this. This is cool.
They didn't worry about other people. You do it your way, we'll do it our way. That was the position that was overwhelmingly the position in the Hebrew Bible. The notion of reward and punishment in an afterlife is virtually non-existent in the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
Some people refer to the revival of the bones in Ezekiel as a kind of a reference to the world to come, but that's really not. It's really a reference to a revival of the people of Israel.
Right.
When they regain sovereignty again and reestablish a commonwealth. So, yeah. So
no, I love this.
Yeah, some of the stuff is kind of projection, and you have to be very careful about that.
Yeah, I like that, because I think even in that passage, it's that the nations will flow to Mount Zion. Not that Mount Zion's going to come over there and kick their butt. But yeah, we get that projection a lot. And I guess you would say that the freedom fighters there in Jerusalem that were fighting in the temple against Rome, they definitely wouldn't have done it if they didn't feel justified. Whatever side you stand on in history to think, I like to be neutral and try to understand, if I was one of these Jews, what was I thinking and why would I have done this? If I was one of these Romans, what would I think and why would I do this? And I think both are right and both are wrong, depending on how you want to try and look at this. But